Hello, everyone. Now, I know that it's hard to keep up on top of what's going on in the Holy Land, but if you want to know more about what's happening here in Israel, I'm Aaron Porras, and this is the Weekly Review.
We firmly oppose and are disappointed by the ICC prosecutor's announcement of an investigation into the Palestinian situation. We will continue to uphold our strong commitment to Israel and its security, including by opposing actions that seek to target Israel unfairly.
That was U.S. State Department spokesman Ned Price reinforcing the U.S. position on the recent launch of an investigation into alleged war crimes by Israelis and Palestinians. The International Criminal Court announcing on Wednesday that their formal probe would soon launch, drawing criticism from Jerusalem as well.
The decision of the International Court to open an investigation against Israel today for war crimes is absurd. It's undiluted anti-Semitism and the height of hypocrisy. Without any jurisdiction, it decided that our brave soldiers, who take every precaution to avoid civilian casualties against the worst terrorist in the world, who deliberately target civilians, it's our soldiers who are war criminals. They said that when we build a house in our eternal capital, Jerusalem, it's been our capital for 3,000 years, that too is a war crime. This court that was established to prevent the repetition of the Nazi horrific crimes committed against the Jewish people is now turning its guns against the one and only state of the Jewish people.
Meanwhile, Palestinians welcoming the opening of the investigation.
أعتقد هذا القرار مهم جدا في سياق أن هناك فعلا عدالة ستفرض على من يقوم بالجرائم ضد الشعب الفلسطيني أو أي جرائم في العالم، وبالتالي ما قام به الاحتلال من جرائم متواصلة كان يعتقد أنه معفي من مغبة مساءلته أمام هذه الجرائم. اليوم هناك وضع حد لذلك، قطع الطريق على الاحتلال لمواصلة هذه الجرائم، وأنا بعتقد الاحتلال سيفكر كثيرا في عملية كيفية مواجهة ما تقوم به المحكمة.
Now, moving on, Israel-owned cargo ship the MV Helios Ray is now back at sea after suffering a suspected Iranian attack. Last week, the vessel was hit by mysterious explosions where 2 holes were punched in the ship's port side and 2 more on its starboard side. And Israeli and international officials nearly universally putting the blame on Iran, while Iran is denying the charge. That said, tensions between Iran, Israel, and the West have been escalating in recent weeks as Iran continually accelerates its nuclear program. And Israel's ambassador to the United States and the UN, Gilad Erdan, now filing an official complaint with the UN Security Council on Tuesday. Erdan's letter addressed to U.S. Ambassador Linda Thomas-Greenfield, blaming Iran for the cargo ship attack, while stressing that repeated Iranian terrorist attacks at sea jeopardize the safety of all international shipping. Well, perhaps easing some concerns, Thomas-Greenfield appearing to agree with Erdan's concerns, tweeting gratitude for a great conversation with Erdan. And this while the United States and Israel reportedly promise not to make any moves pertaining to Iran or the JCPOA nuclear deal without informing the other first.
An Israeli minister is claiming that Iran is the culprit, responsible for a devastating oil spill, the worst disaster in the history of Israel's coastlines. The contamination killed wildlife, led Israel to shut beaches, and banned eating fish from the sea. Here's what Israel's Minister of Environmental Protection had to say.
We have located the crude oil tanker which has polluted the Israeli shoreline. It is owned by a Libyan company and was carrying a cargo from Iran to Syria. This is environmental terror. We have succeeded in identifying these who polluted our country's shores and will bring them to justice. We will sue for compensation in the name of all the citizens of Israel for the damage to the health, the nature, and the flora and the fauna. Now we are finding out that Iran is operating terrorism, not just by using nuclear weapons or by trying to establish itself around our borders. Iran is operating terrorism by damaging the environment. And when Iran is damaging the environment, it isn't just hurting the state of Israel.
The problem here is that she seems to be standing alone. Officials are claiming her announcement was not approved and may not even be true. But if true, this could escalate tensions between Jerusalem and Tehran on a different level than ever before.
Moving along, Iran continuing to lash out in the region, repeating on Monday that if the United States wants to hold talks with Tehran, then it must lift its sanctions on Iran first. The Biden administration, meanwhile, still hinting at its willingness to return to the 2015 JCPOA nuclear deal, but refusing to act first, saying that Iran must instead come back to compliance with the deal before the United States changes course. Both Tehran and Washington in a stalemate then. Iran's foreign minister, Saeed Khatibzadeh, lamenting the United States' choice to continue down the, quote, wrong path.
ببینید ما هیچ گفتگوی دو جانبه‌ای با ایالات متحده نداریم و تا موقعی که ایالات متحده مسیر غلط خودش رو اصلاح نکنه هیچ تغییری در سیاست‌های ایران صورت نخواهد گرفت. ببینید تا امروز که نزدیک به 2 ماه از دولت جدید آقای بایدن گذشته، حتی دولت آقای بایدن رسما بازگشت خودش رو به تعهدات حتی در کلام ما اعلام نکرد.
And all this while Iran is still maintaining that military nuclear breakthrough has never been their intended goal. Now, in addition to reopening parts of the economy for Green Pass holders, Israel's coronavirus cabinet meeting is today discussing lifting the ban on entry from abroad. Ministers pushing to gradually reopen Ben Gurion Airport after 5 weeks of closures and ahead of national elections at the end of the month. This way, as many Israelis as possible would be able to return in time to vote March 23. As for the 2-week quarantine, a new pilot program beginning this week, offering returning Israelis a chance to isolate at home as opposed to inside state-run COVID hotels. Israelis can now choose instead to voluntarily wear a bracelet monitor that will notify authorities if wearers violate isolation. The bracelet hooking up to a smartphone and wall-mounted tracker installed in the home. And already, many Israelis are getting psyched by the idea.
I'm the first Israeli to receive this bracelet. I thought that I'm going to be in the hotel for the next 2 weeks, but I had the possibility to be at my home, isolated at my home, and I think that's a very nice idea.
The new electronic bracelet, it's a good news for the passengers. I think most of them will choose to take the electronic bracelet instead of going to the hotel. They're going to stay at home for 10 or 14 days. It's going to open the skies.
אמרנו בחדשות שיש את הניסוי הזה, ואז אמרנו שאנחנו רוצים, ונתנו לנו את האפשרות. אז זה מעולה לנו, שלא נלך למלונית, אלא שנוכל לעשות את הבידוד בבית כמו שצריך.
Perhaps Israel is acting too fast. That's the case if you ask the head of the country's COVID-19 task force, Nachman Ash. Following the announcement of the airport opening next week, Ash calling it far from the ideal, saying it could set the country back. Chana Rifkin reports on the tricky balance between vaccines and coming out of lockdown.
Israel's coronavirus chief says he would not rule out another lockdown, especially as the country plans to reopen its airport, saying the decision could bring new COVID strains into the country. He said, "We have a few critical weeks ahead. We will have to see if there is an increase in morbidity. It's absolutely possible that we will see more seriously ill people. We may have to impose further restrictions, and we may even have to impose another lockdown." Meanwhile, on Wednesday, the health ministry recorded 4,143 new cases, with a positive infection rate of 5.2%. There are 699 patients in serious condition, with 224 on ventilators. 5,815 Israelis have died from the virus. As of Wednesday, nearly 5 million Israelis received the first dose of the vaccine, and approximately 3.5 million received both doses. Officials say the vast majority of COVID-19 deaths in February were recorded among people who haven't been vaccinated. Last month, 78% of the 935 coronavirus patients who died were not vaccinated at all or received just one vaccine dose. Today, Israel will begin its campaign to vaccinate some 120,000 Palestinians who are legally employed in Israel and West Bank settlements, using Moderna vaccination stock. Israel's military liaison to the Palestinians said it will roll out the immunization campaign at checkpoints and industrial zones across the West Bank. Also, cultural institutions are opening next week for holders of green passports, including theaters, restaurants and cafes, hotels, and more. There's even a series of stadium concerts planned for Tel Aviv, a first in more than a year. Chana Rifkin, ILTV.
Moving on, big news in Jerusalem as Attorney General Mandelblit officially blocks plans to donate coronavirus vaccines to friendly countries. Mandelblit essentially telling Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu that he's acting just a little too freely with the public's money. Chana Rifkin with the report.
Some 21,000 doses of coronavirus vaccines already shipped from Israel to Honduras and Guatemala. This as part of a larger plan to donate roughly 100,000 vials of Israeli-purchased vaccines to 15 Israeli allies around the world. But Attorney General Avichai Mandelblit now putting a freeze on the move, saying he was not asked about the legality of the decision until after thousands of doses were sent out. Additionally, he's questioning the legality of the move as Netanyahu made the decision without ministerial approval and without filing necessary details, like the plan's objectives, compensation given or promised, officials involved, and more. So Mandelblit going on to rule that any future transfers of vaccines to another country must first be agreed upon in the cabinet, or at least another similar body. Now, meanwhile, as legal authorities fight back and forth, health officials are issuing concerns. Health Ministry Director General Chazi Levy suggesting Tuesday that a fourth lockdown is still on the table, adding that the government's decisions are all being tainted and influenced by the panic over coming national elections. Ballots are opening March 23rd for the fourth time in 2 years.
In other news, Israel has made many successful moves when it comes to the coronavirus pandemic, but one controversial decision has not aged so well, and it's now back in Israeli headlines. Israel's High Court now imposing new limits on the Shin Bet's COVID surveillance program. The program initiated last summer as an added method of COVID contact tracing, and the Shin Bet security services were engaged against their recommendation to use terrorist phone tracking technology on unsuspecting Israeli civilians. An expanded 7-justice panel on Monday, however, reining in the Shin Bet's jurisdiction and ruling that as of March 14, the surveillance can only be used on citizens who do not cooperate with contact tracers or who do not recall their whereabouts for the purposes of assisting epidemiological probes. Now, in related news, Israel continuing to cozy up to its new regional allies, the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, and this sparking reports of a developing special security arrangement over the growing concerns with Iran. Chana Rifkin with the details.
Defense Minister Benny Gantz saying on Tuesday Israel intends to strengthen security ties with its Gulf Arab allies. Reports by Public Radio Khan claiming that Israel is considering a special defense agreement with the UAE and Bahrain. And Gantz going on to stress the need for security ties between Israel and its Arab allies, but falling short of going into details about what the arrangement will entail, all while downplaying the panic portrayed in the reports.
I don't think it's going to be a defense pact, but we're going to develop defense relations with every country that we have relations with. We have this process of setting up a special security arrangement, and within this arrangement we can continue and develop our relations.
Meanwhile, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu meeting with the first UAE ambassador to Israel, Mohammed Al-Khaja, the two reportedly discussing joint regional and bilateral projects across a wide range of fields.
Ambassador, welcome.
Great honor and pleasure, sir.
It's my pleasure. I'm delighted to see you. We're changing the Middle East.
Yes.
Abu Dhabi this week hosted more than 900 companies from more than 50 countries for its 5-day annual defense expo IDEX, the biggest of its kind in the Middle East. Israel had been expected to take part in the event following the signing of the Abraham Accords, but a last-minute cancellation was, according to Israeli officials, due to COVID. Now, a new report claims the real reason for the pullout was intelligence of a possible attack by Iran on Israeli conference-goers. Officials have neither confirmed nor denied the report.
Meanwhile, to Israel's north, Jerusalem allegedly making good on vows to prevent Iranian influence in the region. Syrian state TV reporting air defenses activating around Damascus Sunday night to repel an Israeli missile attack from the Golan Heights. And quoting unnamed military sources, the Syrian media alleged that the projectiles were all shot down before reaching their targets, with no casualties reported. Israel, on the other hand, continuing its policy of neither confirming nor denying specific actions across the border, though Defense Minister Benny Gantz is repeating that Israel takes, quote, almost weekly action to prevent Iran's entrenchment to the north in Syria. In fact, hundreds of such attacks have been allegedly linked to Israel over the last few years, with Israel rarely acknowledging any of them.
An Israeli civilian was charged over the weekend for allegedly acting as an agent for the Hamas terror group inside of Israel. He allegedly provided the organization with information that included the locations of Iron Dome missile defense batteries. 43-year-old Mohammed Abu Aadra was arrested following an investigation by police and the Shin Bet security service. Hamas recruited Abu Aadra some 18 months ago, according to the Shin Bet. He then agreed to work for them, maintaining contacts and gathering information. He was indicted Friday at the Beersheba District Court for security offenses that include membership in a terror organization, a decision to commit treason, and providing information to the enemy.
Moving on, Israeli Defense Forces consistently among the first to respond to tragedy, be it for the coronavirus or an oil spill in the Mediterranean. But Staff Sergeant Yonatan Granot is continuing to pay it forwards, going above and beyond the call of duty, even in death. The 22-year-old soldier now saving up to 5 different strangers by donating his organs before being laid to rest Sunday. Granot, who was survived by his mother and brother, was critically wounded when shot in the head on base last week, and the bullet apparently coming from a misfiring weapon that had not been properly unloaded after target practice. But as a registered organ donor, Granot will now be saving the lives of several others in critical condition. Granot's lungs, for one, reportedly going to a patient suffering from COVID-19 at Sheba Medical Center, a first-of-its-kind operation in the state of Israel. And this bringing me now to our next headline. United States Secretary of State Anthony Blinken enthusiastically embracing the IHRA's working definition of anti-Semitism on behalf of the United States and the Biden administration. And this putting the White House firmly against those who argue that the IHRA definition stifles free speech and legitimate criticisms of Israel. The International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance's definition, including general hatred towards Jews, Holocaust denial, and denying Jews the right to self-determination, like by alleging that Israel's very existence is a racist or colonial endeavor. And in a letter to the president of the American Zionist movement in the United States, Blinken affirming that the U.S. is eager to counter Holocaust distortion and to combat anti-Semitism and other forms of intolerance, both abroad and at home. Moving on, the incentives for getting vaccinated just keep on coming. Royal Caribbean International now planning to launch cruises departing from Israel. This means that all fully vaccinated or Green Pass carrying Israelis will be eligible to float away on the cruise of a lifetime. Meanwhile, to open on schedule, the company is working hard to follow health regulations, partnering with Israel's health and tourism authorities to ensure that both crew and guests above the age of 16 will be vaccinated against COVID-19. As for the cruises themselves, the 3 to 7 day trips are set to depart out of Haifa starting in May, taking passengers to Cyprus and Greece, both countries that signed tourism agreements in recent weeks with Israel to allow travel for the vaccinated. And the tickets are set to go on sale next week. Now, speaking of taking progressive steps forward, Israel's Haifa City Council ruling Wednesday morning that LGBTQ+ couples are now eligible for full marriage benefits. Alyssa Hugel reporting.
As of Wednesday morning, all domestic partners living in the Haifa municipality can register as common law partners. And this makes them eligible for all the same benefits that any other married couple would get, regardless of gender or sexuality. That means that LGBTQ+ individuals are all covered too by this landmark ruling in Israel. Now already, Israel is hailed as being by far the most gay-friendly nation in the Middle East, with Tel Aviv even being celebrated as one of the most gay-friendly cities on earth. But there's still a ways to go. Until now, Israel's civil marriage system continues to be a politically hot topic, with only a small number of religious authorities in charge of recognizing marriages. So, same-sex couples, mixed religious couples, and Jewish couples who wish to marry outside the ultra-Orthodox rabbinate can only have their union recognized by the state, after first performing the marriages outside the country. Again though, all this seems to be slowly but surely changing, as Haifa now makes clear. And several other municipalities across the country likewise now taking moves to extend benefits to various partnerships, regardless of gender, sexuality, or religion.
Now, until flights, cruises, and other more social parts of the economy reopen, we're mostly just stuck in waiting. But there are tons of time-tested activities to do when you are in the in-between, and some even dating back thousands of years, as archaeologists in Israel just discovered. Alyssa Hugel with the story.
It's a story as old as human history itself. People finding themselves stuck waiting around and coming up with fun games to play to pass the time. But from backgammon to Leo Bow to the royal game of dice have made a pretty consistent appearance in the games we play. And the Israel Antiquity Authority now finding the largest collection of ancient dice ever found in one place in all of Israel. The huge collection being discovered in Jerusalem by the Western Wall, and offering a glimpse into the daily life under ancient Roman rule.
Over the past few years, the Israel Antiquities Authority has been conducting an excavation underneath the Western Wall Prayer Plaza, funded by the Western Wall Heritage Foundation. And over the past few years, we've exposed a small theater-like structure, probably founded during the Roman period, after the destruction of the Jewish Jerusalem in 70 CE by the Roman legions. One of the finds with extreme interest were these 35 gaming dice. They look identical to modern gaming dice, and you could practically pick one of these dice up and use it today for any modern game that uses dice.
Of course, on top, exposing ancient Roman Israel pastimes. The discovery also exposing another equally human trait, trying to cheat.
An extremely interesting die is this one here. If all the dice usually have 6 numbers, 1 on each side, this one has a 1, a 2, no 3, and 2 4s. Apparently, whoever owned this die preferred to have 2 4s and no 3. Maybe he was playing some sort of game that had some sort of preference for either an equal result or a higher result, and he thought he would be able to pull off this little cheat over here.
All right, and last but not least, a dolphin sighting in Eilat. A single Indo-Pacific bottlenose dolphin was seen swimming near Dekel Beach on Saturday morning. Nature lovers are hoping if it is a male that he will attract another wild bottlenose dolphin named Rona, which has been swimming in the area since 2019. Also on Friday, a sperm whale was seen half a kilometer off the shore of Nahariya, off Israel's northern shores. The whale was seen poking his blowhole out of the water to take a breath. Activists are also hoping that the dolphin and whale recently seen will not be affected by the massive oil spill currently being cleaned up on Israel's shores.
And that's it for ILTV's Weekly Review. I'm Aaron Porras. See you next week.